2,000 years in existence, you might expect a little wear and tear. But Italian officials are adamantly denying reports that the Colosseum is crumbling.
From one angle, it looks complete, but walk just a little farther, circle around it. Suddenly, everything changes. An enormous section of the outer wall is simply gone. It's hard to believe that this amphitheater was ever perfect. Today, what remains feels more like an island of memory. We call it natural aging, as if time alone is to blame. But something happened here. So where did all that stone go? That question sits at the very center of this video. Join us as we explore the glory of the Colosseum and the ruins that is now left. The Colosseum. To understand what was lost, you have to picture the Colosseum as it once was. It wasn't a ruin, it wasn't grey, and it certainly wasn't broken. Construction began in 70 AD and, astonishingly, was completed in just 8 years, a pace that feels almost impossible even today. Imagine thousands of workers hauling massive blocks of bright white stone through the city every single day. The sound of chisels, the rumble of carts, the dust in the air. When it was finished, the entire structure gleamed. The exterior was covered in pale slabs that caught the sunlight so intensely they almost blinded passers-by. This wasn't the weathered monument we know now. It was radiant, a shining snow-white mountain rising from the center of Rome. And here's the astonishing part. The builders didn't use cement. No glue, no mortar holding the outer walls together. The massive stone blocks were simply stacked one on top of another. That was it. Their sheer weight and the almost surgical precision of how their edges fit together kept them in place. But there was a hidden secret. Grooves were carved into the stones, and thick iron clamps were inserted between them. These metal ties stitched the entire structure together from the inside, forming an invisible skeleton of iron, nearly 300 tons of it. At the time, it was simply part of the engineering genius. Centuries later, it would become treasure. Inside, the luxury was even more breathtaking. The seats reserved for the elite were covered in pure marble. Statues of gods stood in the arches, watching over the arena with stone expressions. And when the Roman sun became unbearable, an enormous fabric canopy was stretched above the crowd, shielding up to 50,000 spectators from the heat. This was not a temporary building. It was designed to outlive generations, to stand forever. But forever didn't come. When the southern wall collapsed, everything changed. The Colosseum stopped being a protected state monument. It became something else, a forgotten space, suspended between ruin and opportunity. And then, something almost unimaginable happened. What happened? Why? Keep watching to find out. The erupting chaos. The grand arches that once funneled roaring crowds into gladiatorial games slowly turned into doorways for ordinary homes. Picture walking through Rome in that era and seeing laundry hanging where emperors once passed, wooden partitions wedged into ancient stone, smoke drifting out from improvised chimneys, animals wandered across the arena floor. This wasn't a brief occupation. It wasn't chaos. It became a neighborhood. Inside the amphitheater, a functioning urban quarter took shape, complete with pathways, workshops, and its own unwritten rules. People built wooden floors inside the towering stone vaults, dividing the massive arches into 2, sometimes 3 levels. On the ground floor, you might find a blacksmith hammering iron or a cobbler repairing sandals. Above, tucked into the same arch, his family would eat, sleep, and live, suspended inside what had once been the greatest entertainment arena in the world. Documents from that era show something surprising. These spaces weren't just occupied, they were legally rented and even sold. Powerful Roman families owned entire sections of the Colosseum, the way investors today might own a shopping complex. Behind those arches, life unfolded in layers. There were homes, yes, but also warehouses, stables, and even small chapels. The arena itself, once soaked in spectacle and blood, was covered with soil and transformed into a vast communal garden. Residents planted vegetables and fruit there, using the towering ancient walls as shelter against the wind. For a time, the Colosseum felt less like a ruin and more like a living organism, a gigantic anthill humming with movement. Instead of emperors and senators, children raced along the stairways. Instead of roaring crowds and wild beasts, the air carried the steady rhythm of hammers striking metal and the low calls of cattle. But this new life came at a cost. To make their homes more practical, residents cut new doors and windows into the old stone, weakening the structure bit by bit. Marble slabs from the original seating tiers were pulled out and reused. Some became tabletops, others were smashed into fragments to patch uneven floors. Brick extensions and mud walls crept outward from the arches, slowly covering the clean Roman lines with rough medieval additions. This was the most chaotic chapter in the building's long decline. Officials were already hauling away stone in cartloads, repurposing it for other projects across the city. At the same time, ordinary residents were wearing the monument down from the inside, not out of malice, but necessity. To a medieval citizen, the Colosseum wasn't a sacred landmark. It was simply a massive, ready-made shelter. Thick walls, dry interiors, natural protection. A very convenient rock with built-in caves. This quiet colonization lasted for centuries, and it explains why the inner corridors look so jagged and irregular today, when authorities eventually cleared people out in an attempt to preserve what remained. Archaeologists discovered traces of everyday life embedded in the stone, chimney flues carved into the walls, fragments of medieval kitchens that had, quite literally, fused into the ancient concrete. The greatest arena in Rome had once hosted spectacles for 50,000 people. Then it became a neighborhood, and in that transformation, it slowly unraveled. Would this disparaging attitude be the end of the arena that saw men give blood for glory? Let's find out. Why the Colosseum has no second side. In the 11th century, a powerful Roman family decided the amphitheater would serve them better as a fortress than as a relic. They sealed off many of its arches with brick, fortifying it, claiming it. For a while, that actually protected parts of the structure. But power in Rome never stays still. When control of the city shifted, the new rulers looked at the Colosseum differently. To them, it wasn't a symbol. It wasn't sacred. It was an expensive stone, sitting there unused. And so began what historians now call the official dismantling. Here's the surprising part. This wasn't chaotic looting in the shadows. It was organized, legal, contracted.
I know you're a man of great authority, not brought to this square, be destroyed, and the prisoners I have taken will never be released.
The city drew up formal agreements allowing contractors to remove a certain number of stone blocks in exchange for services or a share of profit. The destruction had paperwork. Where the southern wall had collapsed, a vast clearing formed, a chaotic landscape of broken blocks and rubble. Locals called it the Stone Forest. Each piece was numbered, catalogued, prepared for transport like inventory in a warehouse. Imagine standing in Rome 500 years ago. You wouldn't see a silent ruin. You would see movement, an endless line of ox-drawn carts creaking under the weight of massive white stones. Day after day, they rolled away, carrying pieces of the Colosseum to new building sites across the city. It must have felt like watching a giant being slowly taken apart, unable to defend itself. One common route led down toward the Tiber River. There, the ancient blocks were repurposed to strengthen embankments and construct port facilities, protecting Rome from floods. The same stone that once framed gladiatorial battles now held back rising waters. But perhaps the most striking transformation happened during the construction of Palazzo Venezia. This imposing palace in the heart of Rome was built largely from recycled Colosseum stone. Its foundation, its thick outer walls, even parts of its internal structure, all carved from the same luminous white blocks that once formed the amphitheater's facade. When you stand before Palazzo Venezia today and run your eyes across its massive walls, you are, in a way, looking at the missing southern wall of the Colosseum. The stone didn't disappear, it simply moved. The same story repeated itself with Palazzo Barberini. So much stone was taken for its construction that a bitter saying began to circulate in Rome. What the early medieval invaders failed to destroy, the Barberini family finished. With papal approval, this powerful dynasty removed enormous quantities of material, enough, people said, to build an entire neighborhood. And the Colosseum's stones didn't just stay nearby. Some of them travelled much farther. What cities did they get transported to? And what became of the Colosseum? Keep watching to find out. What became of the stolen Colosseum? Bricks. Huge blocks of travertine were hauled across the city for the construction of St. Peter's Basilica, the most important church in the Catholic world. Moving those ancient stones was no small task. Temporary bridges had to be built. Roads were reinforced just to survive the crushing weight of the loads passing over them. Even Ponte Cestio, crossed daily by thousands of pedestrians, hides fragments of the Colosseum within its structure. Beneath later layers of stone facing, pieces of the amphitheater's old seating tiers remain locked in place, invisible but still present. Not all of the dismantling was so deliberate or respectful. While the largest blocks were carefully transported for reuse, smaller fragments and decorative masterpieces met a harsher fate. Along the roads leading away from the amphitheater, kilns burned day and night. Into them went carved marble capitals, statues, ornamental slabs, works of art reduced to fuel. They were burned to produce lime. It was the cheapest way to make strong mortar for ordinary brick buildings. Priceless marble became binding paste for new churches and palaces. Elite stone, once shaped into gods and emperors, was ground down into dust. That is why, when we step inside the Colosseum today, what we mostly see is its rough concrete core. Everything with clear material value was either transplanted into other buildings or melted down for practical use. The Colosseum did not vanish in a single catastrophe. It was taken apart, piece by piece, contract by contract, cartload by cartload. And in a strange way, it never truly left. Rome absorbed it. The city quite literally grew from its stones, turning the ruins of its greatest symbol into the foundation of a new era. This Colosseum was dismantled so relentlessly because of the quality of the stones. The Romans had built with limestone so dense and durable that it only grew stronger over the centuries. It was easy to shape, long-lasting, and highly prized by later builders. To medieval eyes, this was perfection, not a monument to protect, but a ready-made quarry. At the time, there was no concept of preserving history. The Colosseum wasn't seen as an untouchable treasure. It was a massive stockpile of perfectly cut stone, waiting to be reused. People turned it into staircases for ordinary houses, and even today, you can spot curved blocks in the basements of old Roman buildings.
Slight stain here, a nice straight line against the mortar floor. This is probably the base.
Unmistakable remnants of the arena's seating tiers and corridors. But the stones weren't the only prize. Hidden inside the walls was iron, the very metal that had held the massive blocks together. And suddenly, the Colosseum became a target for what historians call the Great Plundering. Walk around it today, and you'll notice thousands of small holes in the walls. Some think they are marks of ancient weapons or bullets, but they are something very different. What are they, and why are they so much on the standing walls of the Colosseum? Keep watching to find out. The Great Desecration. They are traces of medieval metal hunters, people who carefully pried out iron clamps to melt into horseshoes, knives, and tools. The demand for iron was so high that its extraction became a small but serious urban industry. It was dangerous, exhausting work. Metalworkers drilled long into the stone, sensing where the iron joints were hidden, carving slowly toward their target. Sometimes blocks cracked or collapsed entirely, causing accidents, even deaths. Yet the promise of valuable iron outweighed the risk. The Colosseum, once a symbol of imperial power, had become a mine. And in the hands of these relentless seekers, stone and metal alike slowly disappeared, transformed into the very tools and buildings of a new Rome. Every piece of metal taken from the Colosseum made it weaker. Its internal skeleton was stripped away, and the massive stone walls began to collapse under their own weight. Over time, the perfectly closed ring of the amphitheater gave way to the iconic horseshoe shape we know today. To the people of that era, this was no crime. They weren't vandals or vandals, they were simply repurposing the old for the new, unaware that they were dismantling one of history's most extraordinary architectural achievements. As the amphitheater fell into decay, legends and eerie stories began to grow around it. The empty corridors took on a mystical quality. linking the present to a distant, almost forgotten past. Locals whispered about strange noises echoing at night from the broken walls. These tales slowed ordinary citizens from dismantling the site, but they didn't stop the church or the aristocracy. They continued to strip away the finest marble for their own projects. One record even mentions 40 carts of pure white marble being removed in a single operation to decorate a private fountain. Under the relentless Italian sun, the Colosseum seemed to melt, its circular form torn apart, slowly taking the horseshoe shape we see today. Yet the story of the Colosseum was far from over. By the 16th century, it faced a surprising turn, one that would change it from a mere quarry into a sacred site. By then, the amphitheater looked more like an abandoned forest than a monument. Trees had sprouted inside the arches. Rare plants crept across the walls, creating a miniature ecosystem that intrigued early botanists. The structure seemed to be dying, and locals had begun treating it as little more than a dumping ground. It was in this precarious moment that the Colosseum was about to gain its first real protector, a shift that would set it on a new path from ruin to reverence. Then Pope Benedict XIV stepped in. What did he do? And how did that help? Let's see. The man who saved the Colosseum. Pope Benedict XIV's intervention was, in today's terms, a masterstroke of public relations. To stop the relentless plundering, he declared the Colosseum a sacred site, a place of Christian martyrdom. Modern historians note that there's little direct evidence of mass executions occurring specifically within its walls. Yet the proclamation worked. Suddenly, the amphitheater was no longer a convenient quarry. It was holy ground. Crosses were placed on the walls, and removing stone became not just theft, but desecration. For the first time in history, an ancient monument was protected not for its beauty, but out of fear of divine wrath. Thanks to this spiritual shield, we still have at least half of the Colosseum's facade. Without it, the last stones would long ago have been scattered into foundations, fences, or private homes. Even after the religious protections were put in place, the Colosseum continued to reveal surprises. It's astonishing to imagine that beneath the stone floors, visitors walked on lay such a complex technical marvel, a labyrinth where hundreds of workers coordinated the games. We understand that the lost half of the Colosseum didn't vanish into thin air. It didn't disappear. It was absorbed into the very fabric of Rome. It lives on in the stones of St. Peter's Basilica, in the bridges crossing the Tiber, and in the bricks and walls of private villas. The city literally recycled its greatest monument, letting it become the foundation for new life, new buildings, and new generations. For centuries, people wondered why the Colosseum had collapsed in such a strangely uneven way.
Image coming in out of Rome as we've learned about collapse here. Colosseum.
Most people say it was a worthy punishment for the horrors that happened there. How true is this speculation? Let's see. The truth about the fall of the Colosseum. The Colosseum is widely regarded in Christian tradition as a place where many believers were martyred during the persecutions of Christians in the Roman Empire. Church history and long-standing tradition reinforce this view, and for many faithful, the amphitheater remains sacred ground. However, modern historians are more cautious. Some scholars argue that there is no solid physical evidence or contemporary record proving that large-scale Christian martyrdoms specifically took place inside the Colosseum. While it is likely that some Christians were executed there, often treated as common criminals for refusing to worship Roman gods, many researchers believe that most early Christian martyrs in Rome were put to death elsewhere. Interestingly, during the Middle Ages, the Colosseum was not treated as a sacred martyr site. Instead, it functioned largely as a quarry. Stones were removed and reused in the construction of other buildings, including churches. This detail has led some scholars to argue that if the Colosseum had been universally recognized at the time as a major martyrdom site,
it's a mini Colosseum. This must have been where they were training and preparing for these very complex games.
It likely would have been preserved rather than dismantled. Supporting this idea is the fact that the Colosseum was not included in medieval pilgrim itineraries or in works such as the 12th century Mirabilia Urbis Romae, which mentions the Circus Flaminius as a martyrdom site, but not the Colosseum. At one point, part of the structure was inhabited by a Christian religious order. However, historians are unsure whether this occupation was motivated by spiritual reverence or simply practical use of the available space. What do you think about the story of the Colosseum and its missing side? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for joining us. Find out the truth about the missing side of the Colosseum. We hope you found this video both insightful and interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to explore more shreds in history and the truth. See you there.